Dying billionaire begs Maid to stay one night. She learns his final gift. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The night air hung heavily over the Hale estate, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Inside the mansion, beyond the marble foyer and the endless halls that smelled faintly of old wood and colder memories, Ana Reyes hurried through her final round of cleaning. Her shift ended at midnight. It was already 11:48 p.m. She still had to catch the last bus, then walk 2 miles back to the tiny studio she shared with her younger brother. 12 minutes. Just 12 more minutes. But the moment she turned toward the grand staircase, she heard it. A soft, strained whisper drifting from the billionaire's private wing. Ana, it was almost nothing. A breath. A tremor. But she froze instantly. Edward Hale never called for anyone. Not the nurses. Not the private doctor. Not the rotating team of caretakers who treated him more like a body to maintain than a life to protect. And he certainly never called by name. Ana swallowed, her palms damp. She pushed open the heavy door to his suite, feeling the temperature drop by at least 10 degrees. The room was dim except for the warm glow of a single lamp. Edward lay propped against a mountain of pillows, his skin pale, cheekbones sharper than they looked the night before. The man once feared in boardrooms now seemed made of glass. When he opened his eyes, the effort alone seemed to cost him something. Please, he whispered, voice raspy like dry leaves. Don't leave tonight. The words hit her harder than she expected. Ana had heard rumors. Everyone had. He's got weeks left. Maybe days. The old man is too stubborn to die. But seeing him like this, trembling, eyes clouded with fear he didn't know how to name, that was different. She stepped closer, trying to steady her voice. Sir, my shift is over. I have to catch the bus. And my brother, he's waiting for dinner. Edward's breathing hitched. Just one night. Please. I don't want to be alone. The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. Edward Hale had built empires, crushed competitors, commanded thousands. But now he was a sick, dying man asking the maid he barely knew to keep him company for a few more hours of borrowed time. Ana hesitated. She thought of Miguel, 12 years old, asthmatic, waiting in their room with a half-eaten cup of instant noodles because payday wasn't until Friday. But she also looked at Edward's trembling hands, the way he struggled to keep them still, the way his gaze darted toward the empty sofa at the corner of the room like he feared its silence. Something inside her softened. Let me call my brother, she said quietly. I'll tell him to sleep. I'll stay until morning. Relief washed over Edward so visibly it startled her. He nodded weakly, his eyes closing as if even gratitude exhausted him. As she pulled the blanket higher over his shoulders, she noticed something she had never seen before. A small leather-bound journal on the nightstand, edges worn, pages sticking out like it had been opened 1,000 times. And next to it, a brass box with an intricate lock, old enough to look out of place in a billionaire's bedroom. She didn't touch it, but it felt important. Like something waiting. Something heavy. Something meant for her. Ana drew a slow breath, pulled a chair close to his bed, and whispered, All right, Mr. Hale. I'm here. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. Inside, for the first time in years, Edward Hale fell asleep with someone sitting beside him. And Ana had no idea that this night, this single, unexpected night, would change everything she thought she knew about him and about her own future. Ana sat beside Edward Hale through the long stretch of the night, listening to the soft rattle of his breath mixing with the faint hum of the machines on the far side of the room. Every now and then the wind outside pushed against the tall windows, making the curtains tremble like something unseen was brushing past them. She kept telling herself she would only stay until he was sleeping soundly, but every time she thought about standing up, he shifted slightly, as if sensing her intention, and her heart pulled her right back into the chair. Around 1:30 in the morning, Edward stirred with a quiet groan. His eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment he looked lost, like a man waking up in a place he did not recognize. Ana leaned forward, her voice low and steady. It is all right, Mr. Hale. You are safe. His eyes drifted to her face, and his mouth curved into the faintest attempt at a smile. You stayed. She nodded. I told you I would. He closed his eyes again, but his fingers moved slightly across the blanket, searching for something. Anna hesitated before placing her hand near his. His fingertips brushed against hers for only a moment, but the contact felt meaningful, as though he was grounding himself. People do not usually keep promises to me, he whispered, and the words were barely audible. Not anymore. There was no arrogance in his tone, none of the sharpness he was known for. It was a confession, fragile and unguarded. Anna felt a tightness spread through her chest. She wanted to say something comforting, something that might lift even a fraction of the weight he carried, but the right words would not come. Instead, she adjusted his pillow and checked the glass of water on the bedside table. Her eyes drifted again to the small journal and the brass box sitting next to it. Edward followed her gaze, and for a second something flickered in his expression. Fear? Regret? She could not tell. Do you write in that? She asked softly. He blinked slowly, as if deciding how much to reveal. Sometimes, when breathing hurts more than remembering. The answer stunned her. The man had built an empire known across the country, a man the news described as ruthless and indestructible. Yet he spoke as though each memory had a weight that pushed against his ribs. You do not have to carry everything alone, Anna murmured. He did not respond right away. The lamp cast warm light across the lines on his face, revealing the exhaustion carved there. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin. I do not have anyone left to carry it with. Anna wanted to protest, but he turned his head slightly, looking toward the window. Snow began to fall in slow, lazy flakes, drifting down, like ash under the glow of the outdoor lights. She loved the snow, he said suddenly. The statement came from nowhere, but the tremor in his voice anchored it in something deeply personal. Your fiancée? Anna asked quietly. Edward nodded almost imperceptibly. 3 years ago today, we were supposed to have dinner on the lake. I was late. Work kept me longer than I promised. She drove ahead of me. I got there after everything had already happened. His breath hitched, and for a second Anna feared he was slipping into another episode of pain. He lifted a shaking hand to his chest. The ice was thin. The car slipped. If I had been there sooner, if I had not chosen the deal over her, his voice cracked completely. Anna moved without thinking, placing her hand over his. You cannot blame yourself for the weather, she said firmly. But he shook his head. I can blame myself for making her drive alone. The silence that followed was heavy and raw. Anna felt the truth of his grief settle between them like an invisible presence. She finally spoke, her voice softer than before. You loved her. More than anything, he whispered. But love is meaningless when you fail the person who trusts you most. His chest rose unevenly, and he pressed a hand to his ribs, breathing through the pain. Mr. Hale, you should rest, Anna said gently, but he shook his head again. No, not yet. I need to say this while I still can. His eyes met hers with startling clarity. You remind me of her. Not in appearance. In the way you care. Quietly. Without wanting anything back. Anna felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. I am just doing my job, she said softly. No, Edward said, and for the first time since she met him, his tone held conviction. You see people. Not positions. Not wealth. People. That is rare. The wind pushed louder against the windows as if echoing his words. Anna squeezed his hand lightly. Get some sleep. I will be here when you wake up. He exhaled slowly, letting his eyes close. For the first time, his breathing steadied into a calm rhythm. But Anna did not let go of his hand. As she watched him drift in his sleep, she could not shake the feeling that this night was peeling away the layers of a life that had been locked shut for far too long. And she sensed, deep in her bones, that whatever was inside that brass box was tied to everything he had just confessed. The snow outside the Hale estate thickened through the early hours of the morning, turning the windows white and silent, while inside the bedroom Anna remained awake, listening to the slow and uneven rise and fall of Edward Hale's fragile breaths. She had meant to rest her eyes for only a moment, but the weight of the night and the heaviness of everything he had confessed kept her mind alert, as if some part of her knew she should not let him out of her sight. Around 4 in the morning, Edward stirred again, not in pain this time, but as though memories were pulling him toward the surface. His eyes opened slightly, hazy with exhaustion, but he seemed aware enough to see that she was still there. "You did not sleep," he murmured. She shook her head softly. "Someone had to keep an eye on you." His breath released in what almost resembled a laugh, a fragile sound that faded quickly. "You are a stubborn one." She smiled faintly, adjusting the blanket over him. His skin felt colder than it should, and she ran her palm gently along his forearm to warm it. He did not pull away. Instead, he seemed to lean into the gesture like someone who had been starved of human touch for far too long. A long silence passed, broken only by the faint tick of the antique clock mounted high on the wall. Anna felt her gaze drifting once more to the brass box on the nightstand, its engraved pattern catching the dim light. The journal beside it looked older than she first thought. Its spine was cracked in several places, pages pressed unevenly, some edges folded as if handled with urgency. Edward followed her gaze again, and this time he did not look away. "You want to ask about it," he said quietly. "I can see it in your face." She hesitated, then nodded. "It feels important." He closed his eyes slowly, as if gathering enough strength to lift a thought that weighed more than his frail body. "It is all I have left of her," he whispered. "Letters, notes, things she wrote to me when she believed we had all the time in the world. The box holds everything I never had the courage to face after she died." Anna exhaled softly, trying to understand the depth of what he carried. "Have you opened it since?" He shook his head, the motion small and trembling. "No. Because every time I even look at it, I feel the same ice I felt the night they pulled her car from the lake. And I deserve to feel it. I deserve all of it." Anna felt a wave of sympathy rise in her chest. She reached out and rested her hand lightly on his shoulder. "You are punishing yourself for surviving. But surviving does not mean you were at fault." His breathing turned jagged for a moment, and he gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Anna, if you knew the things I chose, the deals I put before her, you would understand why I call myself a coward." She held his gaze, her voice calm but firm. "You are not a coward. A coward would not feel remorse. A coward would not speak the way you are speaking now." For a moment, he looked at her as if trying to believe her words, but uncertainty clouded his expression. "Maybe," he said weakly, "but regret does not bring back the dead." Snowflakes tapped against the window as a gust of wind swept through the estate grounds, and Anna felt the room grow colder, as though the past he carried had dimmed the very air around them. She leaned closer. "You told me she loved the snow," Anna whispered. "Maybe she would have forgiven you. Maybe she already did." Edward swallowed hard, his eyes glistening in the faint lamplight. "Forgiveness is not something I expect anymore." His voice faltered, and he tightened his grip on her hand. "But you being here, it makes the guilt feel less sharp." She brushed a loose strand of hair from his forehead, feeling his skin warm slightly beneath her touch. "You are not alone, Mr. Hale. Not tonight." He sighed, the sound long and fragile. "Anna, will you read to me?" She blinked. "What would you like me to read?" He lifted a trembling hand toward the journal. "Her words. I want to hear her words again." The request tightened something deep inside her chest. She picked up the worn journal carefully, opening to the first page where elegant handwriting curled across the paper. She glanced at him for confirmation. He nodded weakly. Anna began to read, her voice soft and steady as the words of a woman long gone filled the room. Edward's breathing slowed, not with fear or strain, but with a kind of peaceful sorrow, as if the sound of the past was stitching something back together inside him. As she continued reading, Anna felt the night shift. It was no longer just a vigil over a dying man. It had become something else, a quiet crossing between grief and healing, life and memory, past and present. And she sensed, as his eyelids fluttered closed once more, that the contents of the brass box were not just remnants of a lost love, but the truth he needed someone to witness before it was too late. The journal lay open in Anna's hands as she continued reading, her voice weaving through the quiet room like a thread stitching together pieces of a life Edward Hale had never learned how to mend. The letters were tender, full of warmth and plans, and little notes meant for a future that had never arrived. Each line she read seemed to soften something inside the frail man resting against the pillows. Around 5 a.m, as the first pale hint of dawn crept through the frosted windows, Edward shifted slightly and opened his eyes. They looked clearer this time, clearer than she had seen since the night began. Anna, he whispered. She set the journal down gently. Yes, Mr. Hale. Thank you, he murmured. For reading. For staying. For not treating me like a dying obligation. She shook her head. You are a person, not a task. His lips pulled into a faint, tired smile. You sound like her. He turned his head toward the brass box again. The edges glimmered in the low light, and Anna felt that tug of curiosity return, though now it carried a deeper weight. Edward followed her gaze and drew a slow breath. Would you like to know what is inside? She hesitated, unsure if she should intrude on something that clearly held decades of emotion, but his tone was different now, resigned, wanting to be understood before time slipped away from him. Only if you want me to know, she said softly. Edward's fingers trembled as he reached toward the nightstand. Anna quickly steadied his arm, guiding his hand until it brushed the brass box. He let his palm rest on it for several seconds, closing his eyes as though touching a relic that carried both love and punishment. I locked this box the night after she died, he said quietly. Inside are the letters she wrote to me for our anniversary, the anniversary we never reached. Anna swallowed, her heart tightening. Edward continued, his voice fragile but honest. I was supposed to meet her by the lake. She knew I had been buried in work. So she wrote those letters, planning to give them to me that night, to remind me what mattered. His eyes clouded with grief. But she died with them in the passenger seat. Anna pressed a hand to her mouth briefly, steadying herself. That is not your fault. It feels like it is, he whispered. Every day since. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the heater and the muffled whistle of the winter wind outside. After a long pause, Edward's fingers drifted from the brass box and moved toward her hand. She met him halfway, letting their palms touch. His skin felt chillingly cool. Anna, promise me something, he said suddenly. She leaned in. Anything. When I am gone, open the box. Read every letter. Not for me. For you. She blinked in confusion. Why would I? Because she wrote about love, he said, his breath catching softly. Real love. The kind I wanted to give, but did not know how. And you deserve to understand that kind of love. I want you to know what it looks like when it is not broken by fear or pride. Anna felt emotion swell in her chest, nearly overwhelming. Mr. Hale, you should read them. It is not too late to find peace. He smiled sadly. I am running out of not too lates. But you still have time. More time than she ever did. She squeezed his hand, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. You should rest now. He nodded weakly. Will you read one more page? She reached for the journal again, opening to the next handwritten letter. As she began reading aloud, his breathing gradually slowed, steady at first, and then weakening in a way that made her heart beat faster. He was listening. She could feel that, but it was as if each word was carrying him deeper into the memories he had never dared revisit. At one point, his fingers slipped from hers, not abruptly, but with a slow, drifting motion that made her look up sharply. His eyes were closed, his chest rising shallowly. Mr. Hale, she whispered. No response. She leaned closer. Edward. His eyelids flickered, opening just enough for her to see a glimmer of clarity, or perhaps gratitude. Her words, he breathed. They sound like forgiveness. The weight of those words pressed deep into Anna's chest. She cupped his cheek gently. Then let them forgive you. He exhaled, a long, fragile release that felt like surrender. The dawn light grew brighter, spilling across the blankets as if morning itself was watching over them. Anna held his hand again, refusing to let go, feeling the truth settle over her in a way that made her stomach twist with fear. Edward Hale was slipping, and she sensed that what he had left to say, and what the brass box still held, was running out of time. The dawn outside the frosted windows brightened into a pale gray morning, the kind that felt heavy with quiet warnings, and Anna sat frozen beside Edward Hale, her hand still wrapped around his, as if she could anchor him to the world through sheer will. His breaths were shallow now, softer than the rustle of the curtains, and his skin had grown colder despite the warm blankets covering him. She leaned forward, listening closely, trying to pick up even the slightest change in his breathing, but every second felt like it was slipping further from her control. Edward, she whispered again, hoping he could hear her through whatever haze he was drifting in. I am still here. His eyelids fluttered weakly, a faint acknowledgement, but he did not speak. Anna felt her chest tighten with fear. She had kept patients company before, during her short months helping at the clinic in her old neighborhood. But this felt different. This man had given her more honesty in one night than most people offered in a lifetime. She checked the time on the small clock beside the lamp. It was almost 7:30 in the morning. The household staff would begin their shifts soon, but none of them knew what had unfolded overnight. She wondered if she should call for the private doctor now, but Edward's fingers twitched feebly against hers, as if telling her to stay, to not leave him even for a moment. "It is all right," she whispered, leaning closer so he would not have to strain. "You can rest. I am not going anywhere." A faint tremor moved through his lips, almost a smile, then faded. Slowly, he turned his head just enough to glance toward the brass box again, and Anna felt a chill glide through her. She squeezed his hand gently. "Do you want me to open it now?" His breathing hitched, a thin, fragile sound. He did not nod, but she sensed the answer. He was losing strength too quickly. Anna reached with her free hand and pulled the brass box closer, feeling its surprising weight. The metal was cold against her fingertips, colder than it had been earlier. The lock, an intricate design shaped like intertwining vines, gleamed faintly in the growing daylight. Edward exhaled shakily. "The key is in the journal back cover." Anna carefully opened the journal and felt for the back binding, her fingers brushing against a small envelope tucked tightly between the pages. She pulled it free. Inside was a thin, ornate key, old but polished, the metal warm from her touch. She held it up so he could see it. His eyelids lowered and rose once, slow and intentional. She moved to unlock the brass box, but Edward's fingers tightened around hers unexpectedly, weak yet deliberate. She turned back toward him immediately. "What is it?" His voice was barely audible, each word shaped by his fading strength. "When you open it, read the last letter first." She nodded, her throat tightening. "I promise." His hand loosened slightly, his arms sinking deeper into the mattress as though even that small effort had drained him. Anna turned the key in the lock. It clicked softly, a sound that felt too loud in the quiet room. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside, neatly stacked and tied with a faded ribbon, were envelopes, photographs, and folded papers. The letters looked worn at the edges, many of them tear-stained or creased, as though they had been held during moments of longing or regret. At the very bottom, beneath the ribbon, she found the last envelope. It was thicker, sealed with a wax stamp, and marked in delicate handwriting, "If I do not make it to the lake." Anna's breath caught. She had heard enough of his story to understand the weight of that line. She looked at Edward again. His eyes were half open, watching her with a soft, aching kind of anticipation. She broke the seal carefully. Inside was a letter written in the same elegant handwriting as the others, but this one carried a different tone. The words looked hurried, uneven, as if written through fear or certainty of danger. Anna began to read silently, her eyes scanning each line, and she felt her heart twist. Edward watched her, waiting despite the pain flickering through his expression. As she reached the end of the letter, her breath hitched audibly. She pressed the paper to her chest briefly, overwhelmed. She forgave you," Anna whispered, her voice trembling. "She never blamed you, Edward. Not once. She wrote that she loved you, that she always believed you would find your way back to what truly mattered." His lips parted. A soft, broken sound escaped him. Anna leaned closer. She said she hoped someone kind would find you when she no longer could. A brief shimmer lit his eyes, a fragile mixture of sorrow and peace. "She hoped for you," Anna whispered. Tears welled along his lashes, and his breathing steadied, not stronger but calmer, as though something inside him had finally loosened. His fingers brushed hers weakly one last time. "Stay," he murmured. "Please." "I am here," Anna said, her voice breaking as she held his hand tightly. "I am right here." And as the winter morning continued to brighten beyond the windows, Edward Hale closed his eyes again, not in fear, but with the quiet acceptance of a man who had finally been forgiven. The morning light crept higher across the room as Anna held Edward Hale's hand, feeling the faint pulse beneath his skin grow weaker, like a candle burning down to its final glow. His breaths had settled into a slow, fragile rhythm, one that made her focus on every rise of his chest, as though she could memorize each one. The letter from the brass box still trembled in her other hand, its edges warm from the heat of her grip, and every word she had read echoed through her mind like a truth she had not been prepared to carry. Edward seemed calmer now, his features softened by a peace she had not seen in him before. For the first time since she met him, the shadows of guilt that usually darkened his expression seemed lifted, replaced by a quiet surrender. "Anna," he whispered, barely shaping the sound. She leaned closer immediately. "I am here." His fingers brushed weakly against hers. "Read it one more time." She unfolded the letter again, smoothing the creases gently, and began reading aloud. Her voice shook at first, but she steadied it, letting the words fill the room. The letter spoke of love that had survived disappointment, of forgiveness granted long before any mistakes were made right, of the deep hope that Edward would one day rediscover the parts of himself he had buried beneath ambition. When Anna reached the final line, her voice barely holding, she glanced at him. A tear slipped from the corner of his eye, gliding down the hollow of his cheek. She wiped it gently with her thumb. "She loved you," Anna whispered. "Truly loved you." Edward exhaled, the breath long and soft, as if releasing years of pain in one fragile moment. His gaze drifted toward the window, where snow still fell in slow, peaceful flakes. "She used to say snow was a reminder," he murmured. Anna tilted her head slightly. "A reminder of what?" "That nothing stays broken forever," he said, the words faint, but steady. "That even ice melts. That even winter ends." Something tightened in Anna's chest. She squeezed his hand. She was right. Edward closed his eyes again, but his expression held serenity, as though her words wrapped around him like warmth. Minutes passed quietly. Anna listened for each breath, counting them unconsciously, fearing the moment they would stop. The ticking clock on the wall seemed louder now, marking each passing second with cruel precision. Suddenly his fingers twitched again, barely noticeable, but she felt it. She leaned closer. "Edward." His eyes opened halfway. He looked at her, really looked at her, with a clarity that made her breath catch. "You are the kind of person she hoped would find me," he whispered. Anna shook her head gently, tears gathering. "I am no one special. I am just someone who stayed." "Sometimes," he said, blinking slowly, "that is the most special thing of all." His breathing grew uneven again, each inhale shallower than the last. Anna's voice trembled. "Do you want me to call the doctor? I can get help." He squeezed her hand faintly, the motion barely there. "Do not leave." She froze, torn between her instinct to help and the raw plea in his voice. "I will not leave," she whispered. "I promise." He relaxed slightly. She watched him, every second stretching unbearably. The letter lay open beside them, the last words shimmering beneath the morning light. "Edward," she whispered, her voice shaking, "you are forgiven. You can let go." His eyes met hers again, reflecting gratitude so deep it felt like a final gift. Then another breath came, thin as silk, followed by a pause that made her heart lurch. She waited. Another breath, but weaker. Then one more. Barely there. And then nothing. Just stillness. A silence so complete it rang in her ears. Anna felt her own breath catch, her body frozen as she watched his chest. She waited for another rise, even the smallest movement, but the world around her seemed to hold its breath. "Edward," she whispered, her voice breaking. She leaned in closer, her forehead nearly touching his. "Edward, please," but the stillness remained. A single tear slipped down her cheek as she tightened her hold on his hand. He was gone, calm, forgiven, and she was the only one who had been there to witness the moment he finally found peace. For a long moment after Edward Hale's final breath, Anna sat motionless beside him, her fingers still wrapped around his now still hand, as if her touch alone could pull him back. The quiet in the room felt different now. It was no longer the fragile hush of a man drifting toward the end, but the heavy, irreversible silence that followed after he had crossed it. The world outside continued on, snow settling softly against the window panes, but inside the room everything felt suspended in a breath she could not release. Eventually she forced herself to stand, her legs trembling beneath her. She reached for the blanket and pulled it gently up to his chest, smoothing it with the same care she had given him hours before. "I am sorry," she whispered, though she did not know exactly why she said it. Maybe for his suffering, Maybe for his loneliness. Maybe for the years he spent carrying regret without anyone to help him shoulder it. She closed his journal carefully and placed it on the nightstand beside the open brass box, arranging the letters the way she thought he would have wanted. When she touched the faded ribbon, she felt a soft ache ripple through her. Those letters had been a love story frozen in time, one he had waited years to face. And in the end, it had been her voice reading them aloud as he found his peace. She wiped her eyes and stepped away from the bed, her breath unsteady. It was time to call the private doctor and inform the household staff, but something told her she needed just a minute more before the house filled with footsteps and questions and medical procedures that could no longer change anything. She walked toward the window and pulled the curtains slightly open. Morning sunlight spilled into the room in a pale beam that reached across the floor and touched the bed, illuminating the quiet stillness around him. "You deserved a better goodbye," she murmured. "I hope this was enough." She turned back toward the bed, letting her gaze settle on his face. In the soft light, the lines of pain were gone, replaced by an expression that almost looked like rest. He looked lighter, as if the weight he had carried for so long had finally fallen away. Gathering her courage, Anna stepped into the hallway and pressed the call button for the private doctor. Her voice did not sound like her own when she spoke into the intercom. "It is Anna. You need to come to Mr. Hale's room. Please hurry." The reply came quickly, followed by hurried footsteps and the muffled sound of someone speaking into a phone. Within moments, the hallway filled with movement. The doctor arrived first, followed by two senior staff members who had served the Hale family for decades. They entered the room, their faces shifting from expectation to sorrow as they approached the bed. The doctor examined Edward quietly, his expression solemn. "He is gone," he confirmed softly. The staff lowered their heads, some whispering prayers or quiet words of respect. Anna stepped back, allowing them space, her hands clasped in front of her to keep them from trembling. One of the older housekeepers approached her gently. "You were with him?" Anna nodded. "Yes. He did not want to be alone." The woman's eyes softened with gratitude. "Thank you. He needed someone kind." Anna swallowed hard. She did not trust her voice, so she simply nodded again. As the staff moved quietly around the room to begin procedures she could not bear to watch, Anna felt herself pulled back toward the nightstand where the brass box sat open. She stood beside it for a long moment, her fingertips brushing the letters that had changed everything. And she remembered the promise she had made to Edward just before he slipped away. She would open every letter. She would read them all, not for him, but for the future he wanted her to understand. And though grief still pressed heavily against her ribs, she felt the slightest stirring of something else beneath it, the first fragile hint of purpose forming inside the ache. When the doctor and staff finally left the room to make the necessary calls, Anna found herself standing alone again beside the nightstand, staring at the brass box that still lay open. It felt different now, heavier somehow, as if it carried not only the memories of the woman Edward had lost, but also a responsibility he had placed in her hands. She reached out and lifted the stack of letters carefully, feeling the worn texture of the envelopes beneath her fingertips. Some were creased from being held too tightly, others smudged with old tears, and all of them whispered stories she had not yet heard. She held them to her chest for a moment before placing them gently back into the box. The house had grown quieter after the initial rush, but the kind of quiet that followed loss was different from the silence of the night. It was a silence filled with echoes, with questions, with a strange hollowness that expanded inside her with every breath. She stepped out into the hallway and began walking toward the back staircase, unsure where she intended to go until her feet carried her toward the glass doors that opened into the garden behind the Hale estate. Snow blanketed the ground in a smooth, untouched layer, shimmering beneath the pale winter sunlight. The rose bushes along the stone path stood bare and brittle, frozen in the cold, but one in particular caught her attention. It was the same one she had seen Edward glance at earlier, the one he had told her once held his favorite roses because they were planted for his late fiancé. Anna stepped toward it slowly, the cold air biting at her skin, and brushed a thin layer of frost from one of the branches. Even in winter, even now, the plant held a quiet resilience. She sank onto the nearby bench, the brass box held tightly against her chest. She looked toward the house, imagining Edward standing in the window years ago, watching the garden with a heart full of hope instead of grief. I hope you found peace, she whispered into the cold air. As she sat there, alone but not lonely in the same way she had been before, she opened the brass box once more and picked up one of the letters at random. She did not read it yet. She simply held it, feeling the weight of the words inside. She remembered Edward's final request, the quiet urgency in his fading voice. These letters were not only remnants of his past, they were pieces of a truth he believed she deserved to understand. And she realized then that the night she stayed with him was not only about his ending. It was also about giving her a beginning she had never expected. Snowflakes drifted gently around her as she closed the box once more, holding it close. She would read every letter. She would honor the story he had trusted her with. And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the ache of grief, something warm flickered to life. In the days that followed, the Hale estate moved with a solemn quiet, and while lawyers, staff, and distant business associates came and went, Anna kept mostly to herself, carrying the brass box as gently as if it were something living. Each night after finishing her shifts, she returned to her small studio apartment, sat beside her brother while he did his homework, and read one letter at a time. They were full of warmth, full of dreams, full of a love that had never truly left Edward even as grief hardened around him. And slowly, with every page she turned, she understood why he had wanted her to read them. They were not simply messages from the woman he had lost, but reminders of the kind of love he had hoped she would one day allow into her own life. A week after his passing, she received a call asking her to return to the estate for the reading of his final instructions. She arrived expecting nothing more than a quiet acknowledgement of her support, but instead found herself seated beside the lawyer as he opened a sealed envelope in Edward's handwriting. Inside was a personal letter addressed to her, written on the same stationery she had seen in the brass box. In it, Edward thanked her for staying when he had asked, for helping him face the truth he had run from for years, and for giving him a peaceful ending he had believed he did not deserve. And then came the final line that made her heart stop. He had arranged for her brother's medical needs to be fully covered and had left her the small lake house he once planned to share with his fiancée, believing she would know how to fill it with the warmth he never had the chance to. When the lawyer finished reading, Anna wiped her eyes, overwhelmed not by the material gift but by the intention behind it. Edward had chosen kindness in the end, chosen to leave something hopeful where there had once been only sorrow. That evening, she stood alone on the porch of the lake house, the air crisp with winter, and looked out at the frozen water. She held the brass box close to her chest and whispered, "Thank you, Edward. I will make this a place worth remembering." The wind moved gently across the lake as if carrying her words forward, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something settle peacefully inside her, a quiet understanding that love, in all its forms, had the power to return even after being lost for years. And as the last light of day touched the snow, Anna smiled softly, knowing that his final gift had changed not only her life, but her heart.